Valentine's Day is a pretty cool holiday, unless you're single. With my long-standing animosity toward the holiday, an attitude shared by many, I decided that an iceberg chart uncovering its dark history and strange occurrences would make for an interesting concept. I should clarify that a lot of the entries on here don't directly relate to Valentine's Day itself, other than the fact that they occurred on February 14th. For example, the multiple unfortunate mass casualty incidents, or, get this, the time in 1967 when a farmer in Missouri witnessed multiple green aliens scuttling around his farm that resembled green penguins. Make of that what you will, it's very interesting. That being said, however, there are still plenty of entries actually related to Valentine's Day, so don't be too put off. With all of that out of the way, I present to you the disturbing Valentine's Day Iceberg Explained. Tier 1. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On the morning of February 14th, 1929, Chicago witnessed one of the most infamous strings of gang murders in American history. At the time, Chicago was deeply entrenched in Prohibition-era crime. Illegal alcohol distribution had turned rival gangs into powerful criminal organizations, and at the center of the conflict were two men, Al Capone, leader of the Italian South Side Gang, and George Bugs Moran, head of the Irish North Side Gang. This massacre was the violent climax of their ongoing turf war, and it was focused on killing Bugs Moran, though he wasn't one to die in this incident. Shortly before 10:30 a.m., several men arrived at 2122 North Clark Street, a garage used by Moran's gang. Witnesses later reported seeing what appeared to be two police officers and two men in civilian clothing enter the building. Believing it to be a routine police raid, the men inside offered no resistance. 7 men were lined up against a wall inside. The attackers opened fire using submachine guns, along with a shotgun and a handgun. Over 70 bullets were fired at close range. 6 of the 7 members died almost instantly. The 7th, Frank Gusenberg, survived long enough to be questioned by police. When asked who shot him, he famously replied that no one shot him, and then died hours later. All 7 victims were associated with Moran's North Side Gang, Bugs Moran himself narrowly escaping death because he arrived late. Spotting what he believed were police outside the garage, he turned away and left the area, unknowingly saving his life. Although Al Capone was widely believed to have ordered the hit, he was never charged. Capone had an airtight alibi. He was in Florida at the time, and no witnesses were willing to testify. Photos of the bullet-riddled garage and bloodied bodies flooded newspapers, turning public opinion sharply against organized crime. Poisoned candy and gifts. Much like Halloween, Valentine's Day has long been shadowed by fears of tampered candy. While confirmed cases are rare, in the US, fewer than a handful of verified cases of deliberate candy poisonings by strangers have ever been documented, with most real poisonings historically involving family members or known associates. Despite the low number, media coverage, and true crime cases, one of which we'll cover later on, have helped cement the fear that even a romantic gift can carry deadly intent. Rise of depression and loneliness. This entry is pretty self-explanatory. A holiday meant to put relationships in the spotlight would make a lot of single people feel lonely and envious. There have been supposed studies over if the rate of people ending their own lives increases around the holiday as well, but it is debated. Rise of domestic violence rates. Research has shown that certain times of the year coincide with noticeable increases in domestic violence reports, and Valentine's Day is one of them. Despite the holiday's emphasis on romance and affection, experts point to several contributing factors that help explain this pattern. Elevated expectations surrounding love and intimacy, when paired with existing relationship strain, can heighten tension and lead to conflict or escalation. Law enforcement data reflects an uptick in domestic violence-related reports around Valentine's Day, mirroring similar spikes seen during other emotionally charged holidays such as Christmas and New Year's. Studies suggest that perpetrators may become more aggressive when expectations are not met or when they feel a loss of control. Additional factors, like increased alcohol consumption, social isolation, and financial stress are also believed to contribute to the connection between domestic violence and Valentine's Day. History of the St. Valentines. The name Valentine comes from the Latin word valentinus, derived from valens, meaning strong, healthy, or worthy, and it was a fairly common name in the Roman Empire. As a result, early Christian sources refer to multiple martyrs named Valentine. This has led many historians to conclude that Saint Valentine was not likely a single individual, but 2 or possibly 3 different people whose stories were later combined. The most commonly known figure is Valentine of Rome, traditionally identified as a Christian priest living during the reign of Emperor Claudius II in the mid-3rd century. Later traditions claim he secretly performed Christian marriages, possibly for soldiers who were forbidden to wed. He was arrested for practicing Christianity and executed, reportedly on February 14th. While his martyrdom is considered plausible, the more romantic elements of his story, including the healing of his jailer's blind daughter, appear in much later sources and are not historically verifiable. Another possible figure is Valentine of Terni, a bishop from central Italy, known in tradition for preaching and performing healings. According to later accounts, he was arrested for converting pagans to Christianity and eventually executed in Rome, possibly also on February 14th. His relics were later venerated in Terni, lending some support to the idea that he was a separate historical figure, though most details of his life remain legendary. Some early texts also mention a third Valentine who was martyred in Roman Africa alongside unnamed companions. Virtually nothing is known about him beyond his name, and many scholars believe this reference may represent a duplicate entry or later confusion, rather than a distinct saint. Over time, inconsistent record-keeping and the blending of similar martyr narratives likely caused these figures to merge. By the Middle Ages, Saint Valentine had become a single, romanticized symbol of love and devotion, a transformation solidified in the 14th century. Parkland Shooting. On February 14, 2018, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz carried out a mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, targeting students and staff. The attack left 17 people dead and 18 others wounded. The shooter, who had previously attended the school, escaped on foot by blending in with the fleeing students and was arrested without resistance roughly 1 hour and 20 minutes later. The tragedy is often recognized as one of the deadliest mass shootings at a U.S. high school. It occurred during a time of increased public momentum for gun control, following earlier mass shootings in Texas the year prior. In response to this shooting, several Parkland students helped establish the advocacy group known as Never Again MSD, focused on gun control efforts. Lupercalia. Lupercalia was an ancient Roman festival held every year on February 15th, dating back to at least the 6th century. While Valentine's Day is named after a Christian martyr, many historians believed it was later positioned to replace, or soften, this old pagan tradition. Lupercalia was anything but romantic. The festival was rooted in fertility, purification, and protection from evil spirits, and tied to the legend of Romulus and Remus. The twin founders of Rome were saved by a she-wolf, who mothered them in a cave called the Lupercal, which became the sacred center of the celebration. Lupercalia began with animal sacrifices performed by priests, known as the Luperci. After ritual cleansing, the priests ran through the streets, striking women with strips of goat hide, a practice believed to increase fertility and ease childbirth. Many women willingly took part. Another ritual involved pairing men with women, with some matches lasting months or even leading to marriage. Over time, the festival became less extreme, but it never lost its chaotic reputation. By the later Roman period, Lupercalia was seen as incompatible with Christianity and was eventually suppressed, helping pave the way for Valentine's Day. While modern Valentine's Day celebrates romance, its origins can be traced back to a festival built on sacrifice, fertility rites, and ritualized chaos. Tier 2. Accidental bombing of Prague. On February 14, 1945, the U.S. Air Forces carried out an air raid over Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic. According to American pilots, it was the result of a navigation mistake. At the same time, a massive bombing of Dresden was underway, 120 kilometers northwest of Prague. 40 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Army Air Force dropped about 152 tons of bombs on many populated areas of Prague. The bombing resulted in the deaths of 701 people and the wounding of 1,184. About 100 houses and historical sites were totally destroyed, and another 200 were heavily damaged. The Stardust Nightclub Fire. The Stardust Nightclub in Ireland was a large, purpose-built entertainment venue located in North Dublin. It opened in 1978 and quickly became one of the most popular nightlife spots in the city. During a Valentine's Day disco party on February 14, 1981, with over 800 attendees, a fire broke out in the packed venue and spread rapidly. Many of the patrons struggled to escape due to poor visibility and limited access to exits. The incident resulted in 48 deaths and over 200 injuries, making it the deadliest nightclub disaster in Irish history. Execution of Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was a Ukrainian-born Soviet serial killer, infamously known as the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper. Between 1978 and 1990, He assaulted and murdered at least 52 women and children across the Russian SFSR, Ukrainian SSR, and Uzbek SSR. Chikatilo confessed to 56 killings and stood trial in April 1992 for 53 of them. In October 1992, he was convicted and sentenced to death for 52 of those cases. However, in 1993, the Supreme Court of Russia ruled that there was insufficient evidence to confirm his responsibility for 9 of the killings. Regardless, he was ultimately executed by gunshot on February 14, 1994. The Skull of Saint Valentine. A skull is displayed inside a glass reliquary at the Basilica di Santa Maria in Cosmedine, in Rome, adorned with flowers. Inscribed lettering across the skull's forehead identifies it as belonging to Saint Valentine. However, determining whose skull it truly is remains complicated. There were a few Catholic saints named Valentine, and nearly 1500 years passed between the deaths of these martyrs and the Victorian-era practice of widely distributing and labeling relics. Adding further uncertainty, at least 10 locations worldwide claim to possess relics attributed to the legend. The murder of Reeva Steenkamp. Reeva Rebecca Steenkamp was a South African model and paralegal. She appeared as a model for FHM magazine, and became the first face of Avon Cosmetics in South Africa. She was dating another celebrity named Oscar Pistorius. On Valentine's Day in 2013, Oscar believed an intruder broke in and was hiding in his bathroom. He then fired 4 shots through the door, 3 of the bullets hitting and killing Reeva, who was inside and mistaken for said intruder. At his initial trial, he was convicted of culpable homicide and received a 5-year prison sentence. The Supreme Court of Appeal of South Africa overturned that ruling, and instead found him guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, later increasing to 13 years. Vinegar Valentines. Vinegar Valentines were a popular, and surprisingly cruel, form of anti-Valentine satire in the mid-1800s to early 1900s, especially in Victorian England and the United States. Instead of love poems or romantic imagery, these Valentines featured insulting cartoons and mocking verses meant to ridicule the recipient. They targeted people's appearance, habits, professions, or social status, calling them ugly, lazy, drunk, stupid, or undesirable. The reason why they were called Vinegar Valentines was in reference to their bitterness. They were often sent anonymously as well, making them a socially acceptable way to insult someone without consequence. The original Hallmark Holiday. This may not sound disturbing at first, but let me explain. We all know that Valentine's Day is now widely considered a Hallmark holiday due to its strong commercialization with the greeting card company. So the fact that so many people feel so lonely and depressed each year over a holiday meant for a quick buck is genuinely unsettling. This is a personal take of mine, and I'm sure some will agree. But if you have any thoughts or disagreements on this, by all means let me know in the comments. I would love to read what you all have to say. Tier 3. Cordelia Botkin. I want to clarify that this incident didn't happen on Valentine's Day, but is thematically related. Cordelia Botkin was an American murderer, best known for one of the most infamous poisonings of the 1890s. In 1898, she mailed a box of arsenic-laced chocolates from California to Delaware, becoming the first person in U.S. history prosecuted for a crime spanning 2 jurisdictions. She was born in Missouri in 1854 and later moved to California, where she married and had a son. In 1895, she began an affair with John Preston Dunning, a married Associated Press reporter. The relationship lasted nearly 3 years, even as Dunning's career collapsed due to alcoholism, gambling, and embezzlement. In 1898, Dunning abruptly ended the affair, reconciled with his wife Elizabeth, and left the state to report on the Spanish-American War. Enraged and heartbroken, Botkin began sending anonymous letters to Elizabeth, describing her husband's infidelity. On August 9, 1898, Elizabeth received a box of chocolates with a note that read, "With love to yourself and baby." Elizabeth ate several of the pieces and shared the rest with family members. Within days, Elizabeth and her sister Ida Dean died in extreme pain from arsenic poisoning. The rest of her family survived. These deaths were the first murders by mail in the United States. Elizabeth's father recognized the handwriting on the note as matching the anonymous letters. Investigators traced the poison candy back to a shop in San Francisco and directly to Cordelia Botkin. She was sentenced to life in prison. The Ghost of Sefton Park. According to urban legend, at midnight on February 14, 1867, 2 lovers stood on a bridge at Sefton Park in Liverpool. Their names were William Roberts and Alice Harwood. William had been forced by his family to abandon Alice and marry a wealthy lady, ending their 3-year affair. As the clock struck 12, William tearfully told Alice that it was over. She said nothing, only staring into the water below. She then kissed him, closed her eyes, and asked for one final promise, that he would meet her again on the same bridge at the same hour 1 year later. Against his better judgment, William agreed. Right on cue, 12 months later, they reunited. William confessed he was now married and no longer loved her. Still devoted, Alice begged for one last meeting the following year. Though reluctant, William agreed once more. In February 1869, William was injured in a shooting accident and could barely walk. Despite this, he vowed to keep his promise. With the help of his new family servant, he reached the bridge just before midnight. As the clock chimed, Alice appeared. William muttered in frustration until he tried to embrace her. His arms passed straight through her. Alice turned back, sorrow in her eyes, and whispered, "I will always love you." Then she vanished. The next day, William learned the truth. Alice had died from a fever shortly before midnight. Her final words were reportedly, "Dead or alive, I must go to the bridge to see William." To this day, it's said that every Valentine's night at midnight, Alice Harwood's ghost crosses that bridge, still waiting. As recently as 2001, a park ranger reported seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothing vanish on the bridge in Sefton Park. The Strasbourg Massacre. While much of Europe was gripped by fear and disease, one of the darkest massacres of the Middle Ages unfolded in Strasbourg, France. On this day, an estimated 2,000 Jews were executed during what became known as the Strasbourg Massacre. The victims were burned alive on a wooden platform constructed inside the city's Jewish cemetery. With the arrival of the Black Plague, the disease swept across Europe between 1347 and 1352, killing an estimated 20 to 50% of the population. As panic spread, so did blame. Across Germany, France, Spain, and the Low Countries, Jewish communities became targets of violent hysteria. They were falsely accused of poisoning the wells and conspiring to destroy Christian society. Despite Pope Clement VI publicly condemning these accusations and offering protection, fear quickly overpowered reason. When rumors of well poisoning reached the city in 1348, city leaders initially questioned the claims and continued to protect the Jewish population. However, political pressure and rising public anger soon shifted the balance. On February 13, 1349, Jewish residents were suddenly arrested en masse. There was no evidence of a trial, investigation, or legal process. Their fate was decided without due process. The following day, February 14th, the condemned were marched to the Jewish cemetery, to which they were burned to death. Some historical accounts suggest the massacre continued for up to 6 days, and during this time, young women and children were reportedly offered the chance to convert to Christianity in exchange for their lives. Space Penguins of Tuscumbia. On the morning of February 14, 1967, Missouri farmer Claude Edwards stepped outside to feed his cattle, unaware he was about to experience something extraordinary. Edwards was known as a serious, no-nonsense man with no interest in UFOs, which makes what happened next even more interesting. As he walked towards the east field, he noticed every cow standing still, staring in the same direction. Following their gaze, Edwards spotted a giant mushroom-shaped object sitting near his barn. Beneath it, several small creatures were moving erratically. Separated by 70 feet, 2 wire fences, and a herd of cattle, Edwards approached. The beings, about 3 feet tall, grayish-green in color, were later described as looking like little green penguins, with no visible necks, unclear limbs, and either goggles or large black eyes. They moved frantically beneath the craft. Armed only with rocks, Edwards attempted to get closer, but was stopped cold by an invisible force field, describing it as walking into a wall. The craft itself was silent, seamless, and metallic, comparing it to silk, with oval ports emitting spinning multicolored lights. When Edwards threw the rocks at the craft, they bounced right off the unseen barrier. Moments later, the creatures vanished into the craft. The UFO tilted twice, and then silently lifted off, accelerating towards St. Elizabeth, southeast of Tuscumbia, before disappearing. UFO investigator Ted Phillips later documented physical trace evidence at the site, including a dehydrated circular imprint where the craft had stood. Edwards never sought out publicity or recognition, and only spoke when he believed he was being anonymous. The Phantom Air Raid. On the night of February 14, 1915, Ottawa prepared for a war that never came. Just after 10:30 p.m., Prime Minister Sir Robert Borden received an urgent call from the mayor of Brockville, Ontario. Multiple witnesses claimed that 3 German airplanes had crossed the St. Lawrence River from New York, flying toward the capital. One of these aircrafts reportedly swept Brockville with a powerful searchlight, while glowing objects described as fireballs were seen falling into the river. The Prime Minister alerted the Canadian militia, and by 11:15 p.m., officials ordered a blackout on Parliament Hill. The lights on Victoria Tower, the Royal Mint, and Rideau Halls were extinguished, plunging Ottawa into darkness as residents awaited a possible air raid. Despite being only 100 kilometers away, no aircraft ever arrived. Nearby towns were placed on alert, but midnight passed without incident. The next morning, newspapers proclaimed that Ottawa had felt its first thrill of war. Parliament blacked out again the following night, fearing the raid had only been delayed. Soon, another explanation surfaced. Teenagers in Morristown, New York, admitted to launching fireworks attached to balloons, and remnants were later recovered near Brockville. Officials remained skeptical, noting wind conditions didn't fully support the balloon theory. While cross-border sabotage attempts had occurred during the war, historians agree that an actual air raid on Ottawa in 1915 was extremely unlikely, given the limitations of early aircraft. Most believe the incident was a mix of prank balloons, bad weather, and wartime hysteria, though in later years, some suggest a far stranger explanation: UFOs.